You are probably a lot better at Mario Kart 8 Deluxe than you think, and you just need this one thing. You see, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe can be broken down into 4 main categories of skill: track knowledge, item and coin play, driving stability, and tech. All these categories are extremely easy to improve on, except for track knowledge, and I'll explain why in just 1 second. But first, I'd like to remind you we're on a journey to get to 1,000 subscribers, and we're about halfway there in numbers, but with the way YouTube works, we are extremely close. So join us on the journey by clicking the subscribe button and staying tuned for more Mario Kart videos. Alright, so the first category is track knowledge. Track knowledge is essentially the skill of knowing a track well. This can be things like taking the right path, taking specific lines, or knowing how to pull off harder shortcuts. The reason this skill is so hard is because it requires you to put a lot of practice into tracks and just a ton of time into time trials. The amount of hours you have to put into the game to be able to practice all or even most of the tracks is just simply too much. I only have full track knowledge on a few tracks myself, and I'd say I'm pretty good at Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The way I'd recommend getting some track knowledge is by time trialing tracks that have major shortcuts. This could be stuff like DK Summit and Mushroom Gorge with gap jumps, or Sky Garden and Royal Raceway with Shroom's off-road cuts, or even something like Snowland because of its really big single shroom cut. If there's a shortcut that seems like it's unintended, then I would say practice the track. Track knowledge can be built up a bit on all tracks by simply playing the game online and learning some things as you go. In the driving stability section, I'll explain why driving stability can sort of compensate for some track knowledge. But track knowledge is only the first of the 4 main skills in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so let's move on to item and coin play. Item play is essentially how you manage and use your items, and coin play is essentially knowing how, when, and where to collect coins. Let's start with item play. The number one most important thing to know in item play is first place defense. If you're in first place, you have the highest chance of getting a coin over any other item. But there's a catch. The game will only let you have 1 coin. To make things a little easier on first place, you can only ever have a coin take up 1 item slot, which means if you get 2 items, then one of them is guaranteed to be a defense item. This is extremely useful because second place has a super high chance of pulling a red shell, and any of these items can just block that red shell. A very important mechanic in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe item play is chaining. Chaining is when you use an item right before an item box to try to get a better or more useful item. Chaining can be more complicated, like in the case of the shock, but you don't really need to know that yet as it's not super important. If you're in first place and you have a coin and a banana, it's usually a good idea to chain it if you can get a double item box, because coin banana is the worst combination of 2 items to have in first place, so you can't lose anything by chaining it. Now let's say it's something like a super horn and a coin. Then you wouldn't want to chain it, even though there are slightly better combinations, like Super Horn and Green Shell or Super Horn and Banana, because it's a really rare item combo, so it's really just high risk and low reward. It's also good to note that if you have a coin in your first slot and protection in your second slot, then you shouldn't use that coin until you have to use the protection or until you're going to chain, because if you get booed, then the coin will make it so your protection item doesn't get stolen. If you're in a bottom spot and you get a blue shell or a blooper, then use it right away, because those items are of little to no advantage to you because you're in the back, so there isn't really any strategic way to use them. On some tracks you can use a strategy called bagging, which means pretty much staying behind for the first 1.5 to 2.5 laps of a race, and then using the items you get from being in the back to make a comeback. But this only works well on some tracks, and if you want to know more about that, then I would suggest checking out a different video on the subject. Coin play is much simpler. To start off, coins are really important because having 10 coins gives you roughly a 10% increase in speed, which doesn't sound like much, but it makes a huge difference. Having 10 coins also makes speed items like mushrooms and bills give you 10% more of a speed increase. Even though each coin only gives you 1% more speed, it still is a big difference if you can get a few of them. So now that we know just how vital coins are to gameplay, let's talk about when and how to go for them and when and how not to go for them. Generally, if you're in the back of the pack with low coins, you should always go for as many coins as possible, even if they're far away from good lines, and the coins will make that easier. If you're in the middle of the pack or the front of the pack, then it's generally a good idea to go for something called a lesser coin path. A lesser coin path is a line of coins that is closer to the inside of the check, but also has less coins than the greater coin path, which is the farther and slower line of coins, but does have more coins. Sometimes taking the greater coin path is better if you have a big breakaway, because then those coins will allow you to keep that breakaway and you're not going to fall behind by going slow for a second. And if you're neck and neck with another racer, sometimes the greater coin path will allow you to get that extra speed and just barely get in front of them. One other thing you'll have to remember when racing is that at the end of a race, going for the greater coin path or even going for a lesser coin path if there's sharper lines is never a good idea, because usually you won't have enough time for those coins to make up for the lost time you took getting them. So it's better to just try to snake in a few mini turbos if you can and just stay ahead for a few seconds. I don't want to talk too much about combos in this video, but one thing to keep in mind is that if you're using a combo with higher acceleration mini turbo and lower speed, coins are more important to compensate for that lack of speed. But now we have 2 of the 4 sections done, so let's move on into driving stability. You are probably a lot better at Mario Kart 8 Deluxe than you think, and you just need this one thing. Driving stability is hard to summarize, but essentially it's how well you can drive universally. Imagine if you really fell off the track. That would be massive. If you're not doing this, your VR has likely tapered off and what once felt like skill probably faded away. If you felt like you were good at the game, but at a point your ability to drive without falling off or going into the off-road just left you, then there's a chance you just need driving stability, which is really easy to get. When you play Mario Kart, how do you steer? The left joystick is the only answer. Maybe you thought I was going to tell you some mechanic or some secret about steering, but it really is as easy as if you want to move left, hold your stick left. If you want to move right, hold your stick right. If you already know how to soft drift, then there's literally only 5 positions your stick would normally be in. Neutral, the soft drifting angle for right, the soft drifting angle for left, the direct angle for right, and the direct angle for left. With those direct angles only being for counter steering when you're in a drift. If you don't know how to soft drift, I highly suggest you learn, but if you don't want to, try to hold your stick somewhere in between that sort of diagonal angle and that direct angle for the direction you want to turn. The game's movement is literally in your hands, and it's not complicated at all. You don't need to be taking the pixel perfect sharpest lines ever, because in a race that never decides if someone wins, especially because you're risking a lot by going so close to the off-road or void, because when you're so close to the edge, even the little shaking of your hand on the controller or even a little miscalculation how sharp or shallow the turn is can make you fall off and lose a ton of time and points. The point is, you don't even need to calculate how sharp a turn is if you don't try to drive with insanely tight lines. So if you can just understand that the game's movement is literally in your hands and it's not complicated at all, then maybe you can stop trying to sweat, drive perfectly, fall off the track, and also making mistakes in other areas of skill because you're not focusing on them. If you're not convinced, just play with good lines but without putting barely any effort in the way you move, except when there's tech. This is the 4th and final main skill of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Tech is a term that is short for technique. Tech covers a wide range of things such as super bouncing, motion gliding, kinda soft drifting, half pipe tech, and more. Because I don't want to waste any of your time, I'll just tell you the 3 most important things to learn first. Super bouncing, soft drifting, and motion glider or glider vector. Now these 3 are very important because they can make a big difference in some races. You should just go look up tutorials on how to do these, but with motion glider, if your controller does have a motion sensor, then don't bother with motion glider and instead look up how to glider vector, and if they say anything about switching on motion controls, just ignore that. If your controller doesn't have a motion sensor, usually these are wired controllers or controllers that connect with a 2.4 GHz USB, then go watch my or Shortcut's video on the best controller for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and use that as sort of a guide for motion glider, or you can look up hypergliding in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on YouTube. Now we made it through all 4 main categories of skill in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and if you follow this video, then you should be much better by the time you're done. Make sure to subscribe to see more videos on Mario Kart and even the Switch 2 when that gets announced because I have some plans. And so we can also get to 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. So now you know 4 things that'll make you 100 times better at Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.